son. Krishna and Rukmini had a son, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha is actually Pradyumna's son. And both of them are Vishnu Tattva. So we're going to geek out a little bit today because we're talking about the Chaturvyuha. There is a lot of information about the Chaturvyuha available, and it can get quite confusing because there's so much, and they deal with different aspects of the world and the way they're expanded. And there's not just one Chaturvyuha, there's multiple expansions off of each Chaturvyuha. So it can get sort of confusing and maybe even bewildering. And so sometimes when we read about it, not much sinks in, I find. So what I want to do today, obviously, since you have me today, we're going to talk about how this applies to our life eventually. But at first, I just want to go through a few of these points of what the Chaturvyuha mean, because it does actually apply to each and every one of us. So first, I'm just going to read a few sections that speak about. First I'll talk about Pradyumna and Aniruddha, because that's who's mentioned in the verse, and then after that we'll talk about the Chaturvyuha expansions and where they come from, the reasons, etc. So first I'll talk about Pradyumna. This is from the first canto, 11th chapter, text 16 and 17 purport, where Srila Prabhupada describes a bit about Pradyumna. So he says, Pradyumna, incarnation of Kamadev, or according to others, incarnation of Sanat Kumar, born as the son of the personality of Godhead Lord Krishna and Lakshmi Devi Srimati Rukmini, the principal queen at Dwarka. He was one of those who went to congratulate Arjuna upon his marrying Subhadra. He was one of the great generals who fought with Shalva. While fighting with him, he became unconscious on the battlefield. His charioteer brought him back to the camp from the battlefield. And for this action, he was very sorry and rebuked his charioteer, right? So for a Kshatriya, they wouldn't flee from battle. And he didn't really flee from battle. He became unconscious, so his charioteer took him away from the battlefield. So anyway, he rebuked his charioteer for doing that. Continuing. However, he fought again with Shalva and was victorious. He heard all about the different demigods from Naradaji. He is one of the four plenary expansions of Lord Sri Krishna. He is the third one. He inquired from his father, Sri Krishna, about the glories of the Brahmanas. During the fratricidal war amongst the descendants of Yadu, he died at the hand of Bhoja, another king of the Vrishnis. So this is when they had the Cain fight. After his death, he was installed in his original position. Then Aniruddha. So let's see, this would have come from 10th canto. I think it's maybe chapter 63. I'm just going to give a summary of what happened there with Aniruddha. There's a story that happened with Aniruddha that many of us know from Krishna book. So Aniruddha is the grandson of Krishna, son of Pradyumna. Banasur, who we know, great demon, had a beautiful daughter named Usha, actually. And so one day she was, well, actually this happened a few times. When she would sleep, she would dream of she didn't know who it was, but she would dream of this very handsome fellow. And in her dream, she had a relationship with this fellow. And so one day, and you know, as princesses do, they sleep in a room that has a whole lot of other girlfriends around that are you know, taking care of her. And so one such night, she didn't see this character in her dream, and so she woke up and very loudly she screamed, let's see, what was it? My dear beloved, where are you? Right? And so she was quite embarrassed because everyone woke up and they're like, who are you talking about? You're not married. Like, you know, who could you possibly be talking about? But one of her friends named Chitralekha had these special abilities. So she said she understood that Usha was very much in love with this person. And so she said, okay, I'm going to draw a bunch of different people. And you tell me if you recognize who you saw in your dream. And if that person exists, even in the heavenly planets, I can go there and bring him to you, right? So she shows all these different drawings to Usha. And finally, when she recognized the person, Chitralekha understood, okay, yeah, this is the grandson of Krishna, that's Pradyumna, and I can bring him to you. And so she did. This, of course, led to some complications with her father, Banasur. I'm not going to go through that whole story, but a big fight broke out, not just between Pradyumna and Banasur, but Krishna and his whole army. This big fight broke out. But eventually, Banasur accepted Aniruddha and Usha as husband and wife, so he was okay with it. After Krishna relieved him of most of his arms, etc. So that's Aniruddha. And that's who Yudhishthira was asking about, those two personally, because they're in Krishna's family. So then, in general, let's see. So the first small tidbit I'll read from about the Chaturvyuha is from the first canto, 3rd chapter, 23rd purport. And so Prabhupada writes, Lord Krishna is not an incarnation of the Purushas, as we learned from the beginning of this chapter. That's referring to the Ete Chamsa Kalapungsha, Krishna's two Bhagavan Swayam. That Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and everyone else is either expansion or an expansion of expansion, etc. He is directly the original personality of Godhead, and Balaram is the first plenary manifestation of the Lord. From Baladev, the first phalanx of plenary expansions, Vasudeva, Sankarshana, Aniruddha, and Pradyumna, expands. Lord Sri Krishna is Vasudeva, and Baladev is Sankarshan. Then from 2nd canto, chapter 4, text 10 purport, Srila Prabhupada writes, the expansions of different forms of the Lord, as from Krishna to Baladev to Sankarshana, from Sankarshana to Vasudeva, from Vasudeva to Aniruddha, from Aniruddha to Pradyumna, and then again to 2nd Sankarshan, and from him to the Narayan Purusha avatars and innumerable other forms, which are compared to the constant flowing of the uncountable waves of a river, are all one and the same. They are like lamps of equal power, which kindle from one lamp to another. That is the transcendental potency of the Lord. The Vedas say that he is so complete that even though the whole complete identity emanates from him, he still remains the same complete whole, right? So that's invocation to Sri Upanishad, Om Purnamada Purnamidam. So this is how the Lord expands. Of course, it's noteworthy that Krishna is the original light, which all other lights are lit from, but they're still considered complete. Then this is from 3rd canto, 1st chapter, text 34 purport. Adi Chaturbhuj, the original expansions from Baladev, are Vasudev, Sankarshana, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha. All of them, capital T, are Vishnu Tattvas, or non-different personalities of Godhead. In the incarnation of Lord Krishna, Aniruddha appeared as the son of the Lord, grandson. Lord Krishna in Dvaraka is the Vasudeva expansion of the original group. The original Lord Krishna never leaves Goloka Vrindavan. All the plenary expansions are one and the same Vishnu Tattva, and there is no difference in their potency. So they have full potency. So as today's verse pointed out, he's addressed the Supreme Personality of Godhead because he has full potency of the Lord. Then, so in the 10th canto, 1st chapter, there's actually a section after the chapter called additional notes, because some things, this also happens. There's an appendix in the 6th canto about, it's the pastime of Ajamil, because we learn a lot about chanting without offenses, the effect of chanting. And so there was a whole appendix in that section that one can refer to get a more comprehensive view our idea, our understanding of that particular section. And so the 10th canto, chapter 1 has some additional notes. And so this next quote comes from there. Srila Prabhupada says, Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, has his abode in Goloka. From Lord Krishna come the Chaturvyuha, the quadruple expansions Sankarshana, Aniruddha, Pradyumna, and Vasudeva. There are innumerable Brahmandas, of which all of which emanate from the pores of Karnodakashaya Vishnu. And in every Brahmanda, there is a Garbhodakashaya Vishnu, who is a partial expansion of Aniruddha. This Aniruddha is a partial expansion of Pradyumna, who is partially represented as Kshirodakshaya Vishnu, the super soul of all living entities. These Vishnu expansions are different from Krishna, who resides in Goloka Vrindavan. Right? So the point is they're different from him, but they have the same full potency. Right? Then from also the 10th canto, 2nd chapter, purport to verses 4 and 5, Srila Prabhupada writes that Ananta Sankarshana, so he who holds up all the material planets in each of these Brahmandas, belongs to the 2nd Chaturvyuha, or quadruple expansion. This is the opinion of experienced commentators, right? So that Ananta is Sankarshan, but he's not the original, from the original Chaturvyuha. It's from the expansion that came from the Sankarshan of the original Chaturvyuha. And then another Vasudeva, Sankarshan, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha expand from there. Then in the 11th canto, 5th chapter, text 29 and 30 purport, this is a purport from the disciples of Srila Prabhupada, but they're quoting from the previous acharyas who gave their commentaries. And so it is said there, the original being is Vasudeva, the personality of Godhead. When the Godhead manifests his primeval energies and opulences, he is called Sankarshana. Pradyumna is the basis of the Vishnu expansion, who is the soul of the entire universe. And Aniruddha is the basis of personal manifestation of Vishnu as the super soul of every individual entity within the universe. Among the 4 plenary expansions mentioned here, the original expansion is Vasudeva, and the other 3 are considered to be particular manifestations of him. And of course, the different manifestations are for different reasons. They serve different purposes, and that's what we're going to get into next. So this next bit is from Adi Leela. Oh, no, hold on. Yes. This next bit is from Adi Leela 541 purport. Srila Rupa Goswami says that these 4 expansions of Narayan are present in the spiritual sky, where they are famous as Mahavashta. Among them, Vasudeva is worshipped within the heart by meditation, because he is the predominating deity of the heart, as explained in Srimad Bhagavatam 4.3.23. So Vasudeva, predominating deity of the heart, or sometimes known as Chitta. Continuing, Sankarshana, the 2nd expansion, is Vasudeva's personal expansion for pastimes. And since he is the reservoir of all living entities, he's sometimes called Jiva. The beauty of Sankarshana is greater than that of innumerable full moons radiating light beams. He is worshipable as the principle of ego. So Vasudeva's heart, Sankarshana's ego. He has invested Anantadev with all the potencies of sustenance. For the dissolution of creation, he also exhibits himself in the supersoul, in Rudra, in Adharma, the personality of irreligion, in Sarpa, snakes, etc. Then Pradyumna, the 3rd manifestation, appears from Sankarshana. Those who are especially intelligent worship this Pradyumna expansion of Sankarshana as the principle of intelligence. So Chitta, heart, mind, and then intelligence. I lost myself. There we are. The goddess of fortune always chants the glories of Pradyumna in the place known as Ilavrita, and she always serves him with great devotion. Then Aniruddha, the fourth of the quadruple expansions, is worshipped by great sages and psychologists. So no, I misspoke by accident when I was recapping this. Sankarshana is ego. I said mind. So it's heart, ego, intelligence, and then Aniruddha is mind. So Aniruddha, the fourth of the quadruple expansions, is worshipped by great sages and psychologists as the principle of the mind. His complexion is similar to the bluish hue of a blue cloud. He engages in the maintenance of the cosmic manifestation and is the supersoul of Dharma, the deity of religiosity, the Manus, progenitors of mankind, and the Devatas, demigods. So then in a lecture in Bombay in 1975, Srila Prabhupada mentioned that the Sankarshana feature of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the controller of the Bhutendriya Mano Mayam, these five elements, Bhuta, Indriya, and the 10 senses in the mind, they are similarly Sankarshana, Pradyumna, Aniruddha. They are different controlling deities of the different functions of the mind, intelligence, and ego. So just to get into that a little bit, the mind, intelligence, and ego. So Lord Krishna, by his quadruple expansion, Vasudeva, Sankarshana, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha, is the Lord of psychic action, namely thinking, feeling, willing, and acting. That comes from the purport of Srimad Bhagavatam 4:24-36. And then so here's some subpoints. Lord Sankarshan, the master of ego, establishes the field of knowledge required for action, which involves the psychological process of thinking. Right? So Lord Sankarshan is the master of ego, and he establishes the field of knowledge required for action, which involves thinking. So thinking. Then Lord Pradyumna, the master of intelligence. So this is for feeling, right? So he establishes the right attitude and qualities required for accomplishing the action, which involves the psychological process of feeling, right? Then Lord Aniruddha, the master of the mind, establishes the goal of our action, which involves the psychological process of willing, right? So then we're willing to do it, right? So the ego is required for thinking, right? So in other words, if it's the pure ego, it means I am servant of Krishna. Therefore, then you'll go to the intelligence and try to figure out what's required for accomplishing the action that we're thinking about, right? Then you have Pradyumna in the intelligence, who will establish the right attitude and qualities for accomplishing that. Then Aniruddha, the mind, establishes the goal, like what's the purpose that we want to achieve from this. And then Lord Vasudeva, the master of chitta or consciousness, establishes the process of implementation, which involves the psychological process of acting, right? So thinking, feeling, willing, and acting. Acting necessitates the harmonious application of the three psychological processes of thinking, feeling, and willing. So there's how we can see these chaturvyuha just within our own psyche, within our own process of thinking, feeling, willing, and acting. Then superficially, we see that these Purushas, Sankarshana, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha, have a relationship with Maya. But above them in the fourth dimension is Lord Krishna, Vasudeva, who has no contact with material energy. This is coming from Chaitanya Charitamrita Adi Lila 252. Now notice it said superficially we see that they have a relationship with Maya, but they don't actually, it's just superficial. Thus Vasudeva, as Bhagavan, the source and shelter of all Purushas, superintends the universal cosmic order, while the other Vyuhas, as the Purusha avatars, are each assigned two distinct types of functions within the cosmos. One related to samasti, which is the level of universal creation, and the other is related to vyasti, or a level of guiding the jivas on the path to salvation. So with respect to the functions of creation, which is samasti, it is said that with Sankarshana, through bala, one of the qualities, the creation assumes an embryonic form. Next, from Pradyumna through Aishvarya, the duality of Purusha and Prakriti makes its appearance. And Aniruddha through Shakti enables the body and soul to grow, right? So that's the samasti on the level of universal creation. Then on the level of guiding the jivas, then we go back to Sankarshan again. Through Jnan, knowledge, teaches the Siddhanta, or the governing principles of pure bhakti. Then Pradyumna, through Virya, helps to translate these principles into practice. So you have the knowledge of it, and then you have how to practice it, Kriya. And Aniruddha, through Tejas, brings about the fruit of such practice, the goal, Kriya Pala, which is freedom from material entanglement. So we see in the Vyasti, from Sankarshana is Sambandha. From Pradyumna, Sambandha means knowing who we are, who Krishna is, and what our proper relationship is. We are the eternal servant of Krishna. So through Sankarshan, we get to understand the Sambandha. Through Pradyumna, we learn how to apply that knowledge, which is called Abhideya. And through Aniruddha, the goal, that's the prayojana, right? So that brings about that. Thus, all actions at the universal level, samasti, and at the individual level, vyasti, must be directed for the pleasure of the Supreme Lord Vasudeva in order to attain the transcendental abode of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So basically, it's saying that anything we do, we have to direct that at the pleasure of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So although what I've been reading so far seems kind of dry and maybe confusing, it's very much in parallel with what Srila Prabhupada always writes in his purports of how we are to engage all of our activities, our proclivities, our tendencies, our attachments in the service of Krishna to purify them, right? And once we purify our senses, then we become qualified to go back home, back to Godhead. So then it looks like I probably won't have time to read all what I was going to read. There's a section in Madhya Lila, 20th chapter, verses 188 through 207. And basically it talks about how this Chaturvyuha expands. So that the original Chaturvyuha is in the spiritual world. And each of them expands and they form the 24 Vishnu forms. So if you have seen an old version of the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, on the cover there was a illustration or a painting of Goloka Vrindavan, and then around it there are these little four-armed Vishnu forms, and they have a little name under each of them. And there's, if you look at the front and the back, there's actually 24 of them. And so there's these 24 names, and the first 12 names should be very familiar to us. I'm gonna read part of this because it's quite cool. But basically, depending on how each of these four-armed Vishnu forms are holding the four weapons in the hands, there's 24 different combinations of that. And so, but these are all expanded from the first Chaturvyuha. So from the original quadruple expansions, 24 forms are manifested. They differ according to the placement of the weapons in their four hands. They are called Vaibhava Vilas. Lord Krishna again expands, and within the Paravyoma, the spiritual sky, he is situated in fullness as the four-handed Narayana. Let me get to these. Okay. Out of the Chaturvyuha, there are 3 expansions, and each and every form, and they are named differently according to the position of the weapons. So the Vasudeva expansions, so there's three coming from each of the 4. Those are the primary 12 plus the 4 that they're coming from. So the Vasudeva expansions are Keshava, Narayan, Madhava. They're in that order. So those 3 names in that order should mean something to most of us. Om Keshavaya Namaha, Om Narayana Namaha, Om Madhavaya Namaha. The expansions of Sankarshana are, you guessed it, Govinda, Vishnu, and Madhusudana. This Govinda is different from the original Govinda. So this is a four-arm form. This isn't the son of Nanda Maharaj. That's pointed out. The expansions of Pradyumna, I almost want to ask someone to unmute themselves and guess what the next three are, but you might not be quick enough. So we ended up with Govinda, Vishnu, and Madhusudana. If someone wants to unmute and guess what the next three are from Pradyumna. If not, no problem. It's Trivikram, Vamana, and Sridhar. And so if you notice a pattern starting to form, be prepared to unmute yourself for the expansions of Aniruddha, the last three. Anyone? Krishikesh?
It's all the Tilak mantras.
It is. Oh, is that Mikey? All right, Krishna.
Haribo.
So what are the last three? You know, from your prasadam days?
I can't remember.
Okay, so it's Rishikesh, Padmanabha, and Damodar.
Haribo.
Last three. And then also it points out that this Damodar is different from Radha Damodar, the son of Nanda Maharaj and Vrindavan. So this is the four-arm Vishnu form. But well done, sir. You recognize that that's where these are from. Then it continues. These 12 are the predominating deities of the 12 months. When putting the 12 tilak marks on the 12 places of the body, one has to chant the mantra consisting of these 12 Vishnu names. After daily worship, when one anoints the different parts of the body with water, these names should be chanted as one touches each part of the body. So then, from Vasudeva, Sankarsana, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha, there are 8 additional pastime expansions. And so here are the names of those. Actually, I'm going to skip over and do where they come from. Otherwise, it's repetitive. Okay, so there's 8. And then of the two, of these 8, two are pastimes of Vasudeva. Their names are Adhokshaja and Purushottama. The 2 pastime forms of Sankarsana are Upendra and Achyuta. The pastime forms of Pradyumna are Nrsimha and Janardhan. And the pastime forms of Aniruddha are Hari and Krishna. Again, not the son of Nanda. All these 24 forms constitute the chief Prabhas, Vilas, pastime forms of the Lord. They are named differently according to the position of the weapons in their hands. And then that chapter will also, it actually describes in detail which of those names has which of the symbols in which of the hands, in case you're interested in that sort of thing. And then we get to the good stuff, what actually relates to us. So I'm just going to read two more bits here. The first one is from the first canto, 5th chapter, verse 34, purport. Srila Prabhupada writes, according to Pancharatra, Narayan is the primeval cause of all expansions of Godhead. These are Vasudeva, Sankarsana, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha. Vasudeva and Sankarsana are on the middle, left, and right. Pradyumna is on the right of Sankarsana, and Aniruddha is on the left of Vasudeva. And thus the 4 deities are situated. They are known as the 4 aides de camp of Lord Sri Krishna. This is a Vedic hymn or mantra beginning with Omkar Pranava, and thus the mantra is established by the transcendental chanting process, namely Om Namo Dimahi, etc. Here's the important part. The purport is that any transaction, either in the field of fruitive work or empiric philosophy, which is not ultimately aimed at transcendental realization of the Supreme Lord, is considered to be useless. Naradaji has therefore explained the nature of unalloyed devotional service by his personal experience in the development of intimacy between the Lord and the living entity by a gradual process of progressive devotional activities. Such a progressive march of transcendental devotion for the Lord culminates in the attachment of loving service of the Lord, which is called prema. In different transcendental, which is called prema in different transcendental variegatedness called rasas. And then the last one I'll read before we transition to our very short discussion. Sorry about that. is from the 6th canto, 9th chapter, verse 33 purport. The Supreme Personality of Godhead has numerous transcendental names pertaining to different grades of revelation to various grades of devotees and transcendentalists. When he is realized in his impersonal form, he is called the Supreme Brahman. When he is realized as the Paramatma, he is called Antaryami. And when he expands himself in different forms for material creation, he is called Kshirodakashaya Vishnu, Garbhodakashaya Vishnu, and Karnadakashaya Vishnu. When he is realized as Vasudev, Sankarshan, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha, the Chaturvyuha, who are beyond the 3 forms of Vishnu, he is the Vaikuntha Narayan. Above realization of Narayan, realization of Baladev comes the important part. All these realizations are possible when one engages fully in devotional service. The covered core of one's heart is then completely open to receiving an understanding of the Supreme Personality of Godhead in his various forms. So now we come to what this means for us, and I'll try to keep it as brief yet complete as possible. So many times we read about these aspects of Krishna and his expansions. And like I mentioned at the beginning, some of them seem either dry or confusing, or just they don't seem like they pertain to us. But the thing is this: if we're actually able to see Krishna in everything, and we spontaneously always think of him and never forget him, then that is the topmost realization, right? But most of us aren't on that realization, right? We're spontaneously attracted to sense gratification, right? When we get out of bed, the thing that we automatically will do, whether we want to or not, is engage in some sort of sense gratification, right? Seeing ourselves independent from the Supreme Lord. And so if we analyze our day, we find that most of the day, we're basing our decisions based on, our previous experiences or our preferences, personal preferences like that. We're not generally basing them on Shastra and Guru and Sadhu. We try, right? So the idea is, if we did see Krishna everywhere, there wouldn't be a problem. But since we don't, we have to learn to appreciate Krishna's presence in all of these other things, right? So the fact that we are attached to different aspects of material nature, the attachment isn't the problem. The spontaneity of it isn't the problem. The problem is that we're not seeing it in connection with Krishna. We're seeing how it serves us, our senses, right? And so the potency that we admire in a thing or an activity or a situation or an idea is actually just a reflection of what's there in the spiritual world. So it's valuable, right? So the reason we're attracted to these things is actually because of Krishna's potency within it. There's nothing else that is attractive, so it has to be. So the process of Krishna consciousness, purifying the senses, means that we have to identify what it is about these things that we're attracted to that serve us personally, and then learn how it actually just came from Krishna and how it's actually meant to be used in Krishna's service, right? And that comes through, we were talking about the psychological, we have Lord Sankarshan, he's the master of the ego. Lord Pradyumna is the master of the intelligence. Lord Aniruddha is the master of the mind. And Vasudeva is the master of chitta, or consciousness, the heart, acting, right? So thinking, feeling, willing, and acting, these are all things that we need help with, right? And so if we start seeing these different aspects of Krishna, which we're already, in other words, in the material world, we're already engaged in Krishna's different forms, right? Brahman is nothing but Krishna, right? It's just a partial realization of it. So since we're attached to that aspect of Krishna, right, we know that it comes from him personally. So we don't stop worshiping Krishna, but we have to understand how the things that we're not connecting to Krishna are actually properly related to Krishna. And that can come through reading sections which seem like they're talking about Brahman realization or Paramatma realization, or just psychological development, developing the intelligence, purifying that in Krishna service, purifying the mind. This is all gone over in the beginning of Bhagavad Gita. How to make the mind a friend by engaging the intelligence, and then therefore the intelligence can then influence the mind. And then if the mind's under control, then the senses are under control, like that. And so if we engage our senses, mind, and intelligence in Krishna service constantly, then we can actually come to the platform of Krishna consciousness. So in all circumstances, Krishna is our focus and our goal, but our consciousness has to be elevated from its current state to the pure state, right? So Brahman, Paramama, and Bhagavan, although they're different levels of realization to the same supreme being, we have to understand where we're coming from, and then we have to progress on that path by any means necessary, really. So we have to be careful not to get distracted with the details of it, though. So one might say, so sometimes when I talk about this subject matter, it almost sounds like I'm promoting Brahmavadi-ness, because I'm talking about how you can see everything as part of Krishna. But it's not, because the principle is there that although it's on the level of Brahman, it's actually higher than where we currently are, because we're seeing it as separate from Krishna when we're engaged in a material activity. That's seeing it as separate from Krishna. So a step up would be to see how the thing that we're attached to is actually Krishna. That's the Brahman platform. Everything is Krishna. But if we know that Krishna is a person, right, then it's automatically on that higher level. But the point is that we have to address that. The fact that we have material attachments, we have to address that and understand how these things are actually just aspects of Krishna's personality, and how we can appreciate them in the proper context, in its pure original state, and use it in the service of Krishna instead of the service of our senses. So the most common example that Srila Prabhupada gives is, so we're part and parcel of Krishna. It's like being a leaf of a tree, right? And so say the leaf understands the value of water. It sees water, it likes it. And so it's holding it in the leaf, right? That's the perverted reflection, understanding that water has value. So to think that the water is then meant to just serve me as a leaf, and that's it just stays on the leaf, and somehow I'm going to get benefit from it, nutrients from it. That's not proper understanding. But if we understand, okay, the water, it will nourish me, but it has to go through the roots of the tree, right? It doesn't go through me, it goes through the root, right? So if knowing that, then we put the water on the root, then that's complete consciousness. So in the same way, our material attachments, when we find something that has value that we appreciate or we're attached to, but in a material way, we just have to see how it's actually meant to be used. It's not water to put on the leaf, it's water to put on the root, right? And so that's what the process of Krishna consciousness, purifying our senses, one attachment at a time, using them in Krishna's service the way that they're actually meant to be used, and then coming to this platform of seeing Krishna in everything in him. Okay, so I'm going to stop there and see if there are any questions or comments or any such thing. Hopefully that first part wasn't too long. I know that speaking of these things is sometimes, as I mentioned, it can be tough sometimes. But it's important to understand Krishna's different forms, because basically this whole material world, right, the reason why it's here is that we individual jivas misused our free will, and we wanted to be separate from Krishna. And there's no such thing as being separate from Krishna. Krishna's everything. We're part of him. But since we wanted that, and Krishna fulfills all of our desires, he actually made an illusory representation of a world where we live as if we are independent from him. But everything that we use and exploit to try to forget him is actually nothing but his form. It's just an expansion of his form. So the fact that he expanded himself just to satisfy the whimsical desires of these, rebellious jivas is a display of his unconditional love for us, right? We don't see it that way. We just see it as a grounds for enjoyment, and we use it to try to forget him. But the very things that we are using to try to forget him can be tools to help us become liberated from the bondage of this material world. We just have to know how to use everything properly, right? So first, it's the sambandha, understand what our relationship is with Krishna. If we truly understand that we are the eternal servant of Krishna, then we're not going to be trying to enjoy things separately, because everything is Krishna's, nothing is mine, right? So I don't try to enjoy anything separately. And so if we have the proper sambandha, then we'll engage in the proper abhideya, right? Because abhideya is just understanding what the relationship is and acting accordingly, right? So I know this, therefore I will act in this way. This isn't mine, therefore, I use it just for Krishna. And then the prayojana, that's how we get to the goal, which is to go back to Godhead. So even though these things can seem a little dry, they very much pertain to us. We just have to see how they do. And so hopefully with today's discussion, we know a little bit more how to engage these things.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Very nice.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Nice class. You went very deep into the subject. And I have one question. You said that Narayana expanded into Vasudev, Sankarshna, Pradyumna, Aniruddha. Narayana is Krishna, or?
So Narayan comes from Krishna. So Krishna, as we mentioned at the very beginning, Ete Chamsakala Pungsham, Krishna is to Bhagavan Swayam, that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And so all expansions come from him. And so his first expansion is Baladev, who is also known as Sankarshana, right? And from that Sankarshana, then the Chaturvyuha expands from Baladev, actually. Does that make sense?
And Vasudev, so you said that Narayana expanded himself into these four forms: Vasudev, Sankarshna, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha. So Vasudev is Krishna, right?
Yes.
So Narayana expanded into Krishna. That I don't understand.
No. So no. So in other words, Vasudeva is Krishna, but Vat means the original Krishna, where everything comes from. Then each Chaturvyuha has a Vasudeva, which is non-different from Krishna, but it's coming through Sankarshana. So it can seem confusing, but no. I'm looking for that quote now. I think it's the one that was from 1.537. So according to Pancharatra. Yeah, but no, yeah, that's the proper understanding that Krishna is the supreme, and he expands, and then from his expansion, there's more expansion. There's so many expansions, but as it is pointed out in I think it's the beginning of the third chapter, maybe the first canto, is that Ete Chamsakala Pumsham, Krishna's to Bhagavan Swayam Indrari Yakalam Loka. I forget the last part of it. Anyway, but Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and from him come all the different plenary portions and portions of plenary portions, etc. So although it can seem like, since the next set of Chaturvyuha is coming from Sankarshana, it can seem like, oh, so Krishna comes from Sankarshana, but it's not exactly like that, because it's like there's the original light and then all the other lights are lit from that. But no, Krishna doesn't have a separate source.
Krishna sometimes expands into himself, Krishna.
In other words, they're all himself. It's pointed out that they all have the same potency of Krishna. And then the one document I was reading showed how Vasudeva actually, so he's full in all six, but Sankarshan, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha, although they possess all six, there are two of the qualities that are more prominent for different aspects of whatever he's doing. So as the mind, as the intelligence, as the ego, or as the so the thinking, feeling, willing, and acting. So there, in other words, it's all Krishna, but since he's performing different activities, he expands in that way. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So Narayan is also Krishna, but he's not Krishna incomplete. He's a portion.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very
Means
much.
he's, yeah.
And I also, thank you for reminding about this 12 names. We were studying it when Krishna was born, and all the ladies were bathing Krishna, and they were chanting these 12 names like Damodar, Shridhar, all those names. So just remember. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for
Yeah.
your
It comes up also in the, I think when the Narayan Astra has to be made, I think they're in this order as well. So there's something to it. It's certainly not a whimsical thing. It comes up over and over.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment. Anyone else? I apologize for missing. Yeah, go ahead.
Now, can you tell me where you got the information about which, the mind, intelligence, the predominating, or I don't know how you even said it, but
Okay. Yeah. So
About thinking,
the original-
feeling, and willing.
yeah, thinking, feeling, willing, and acting. So the original quote, which came right before that, was from Srimad Bhagavatam 4:24-36. But the actual analysis of it then came from, let's see, one was from Lakshmi Tantra, but I think that was the next one, about that each of those three have two predominating qualities. This one came from, what was the other one? I can't think of it off the top of my head there.
okay, I'll at
But
least
yeah.
start here.
Yeah, but it's an analysis of basically that verse, and then it might be Vishnu Purana. I'm not 100% sure though. I have to double check that. I'll get back to you on that one. But it's mentioned. So in other words, one of the things I read mentioned that for Sankarshan it said chitta, or no, sorry, for Vasudeva it said chitta, or no, it said heart, which is the same chitta or consciousness. But Sankarshan said ego, Pradyumna said intelligence, Anuruddha said mind. And that one was from, let's see where that was. Before there. So, okay. Yeah, Adi Leela 5:41 purport, Chaitanya Charitamrita. So yeah, that gives each of the expansions and what they represent. So Sankarsana, ego, Pradyumna, intelligence. I don't know. Yes, yeah, intelligence, yeah, etc. So yeah, that'll be there in Adi Leela 5:41 purport. Also,
We had actually, when reading the Chaitanya Charitamrita on Wednesdays, we had gone through those 24 forms of Vishnu with the different, and then we went back again to the start of the Chaitanya Charitamrita because the attendance was getting better. So I think he felt it better that we get started again. But they were not kidding when they said, Bhagavad Gita is the undergrad, a Bhagavatam is the, because really the amount of detail and clarification that there is in the Chaitanya Charitamrita for what is getting started in the Gita is amazing. Definitely beyond my level. I enjoy it while I'm listening, but then afterwards it's like, where do I, how do I retrieve it? That's not happening.
Yeah, what I appreciate most about the Chaitanya Charitamrita is it's actually quite a nice balance between tattva and rasa, but the rasa is just very carefully nestled in these in these thick walls of tattva. So if you don't deserve to get to the rasa, you won't make it through the tattva. I very much appreciate that about the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. But yeah, it takes a bit. It takes some understanding, some prerequisite understanding to catch everything that's there. Even in Bhagavad Gita, you read it over and over again, you catch more and more each time. So it's said that after you study Srimad Bhagavatam, then you go and you study Bhagavad Gita again, and then you'll pick up more. You'll actually pick up Bhagavatam aspects, because Srila Prabhupada gave us everything in Bhagavad Gita. And then after studying Chaitanya Charitamrita, again go back and then do that, and then you just keep doing the whole thing over and over and over again, basically. Because the idea is that, so here in our material conditioning, we have all these different voices in our heads, right? We have situations that we observe, and we relate them to something that happened in our past. And so early in my life, I used to relate things to either personal experiences or movies or something that a friend of mine did, like that. And so the filter of understanding stuff was going through a bunch of junk, basically. And so the point is that in order to purify the intelligence, so we know how to purify the senses, right? But to purify the intelligence, we have to study Shastra to the point where the filter that we receive knowledge through is actually Shastra, instead of different movies that we became songs or things like that we became attached to. And so that's why it's important to always study Shastra. And yeah, if one particular Shastra is, if we find that it's a bit too elevated, then it just means that either we need more Sangha, or that we need to go and study the other stuff more scrutinizingly. But yeah, it's quite important. Is there anything else?
Just very grateful that we have YouTube, so we can revisit this class as many times as we need to do.
Yeah, there was a lot there, and I kind of I almost wanted to trim it down a bit, but each section that I read had a different aspect that was important for us. So I wanted to just go through, and I didn't think it would take that long, honestly, but anyway, it's there. So thanks for hanging in there.
Yeah. I guess if there are no more questions, we can end the class here and wait 2 weeks to have Carucamdra Prabhu back again.
Yeah, sorry I missed 2 weeks ago. There was internet problems and I felt super bad about it. But I found out that there was a nice class that happened anyway, so it was Krishna's arrangement.
Yes. Thank you very much, Prabhu.
Thank you. Okay. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.
Jai.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.